You started recording?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Photography equipment and capturing. So today we will cover the remaining subjects. Just let me go down to the yeah. So this is where we will start from today. So yeah, focusing is one of the most important aspect of every photography. So depending upon the kind of equipment you have, whether you're using with a lens and a DSLR or a scope and a DSLR or a scope and a CCD CMOS kind of camera or a lens and a CMOS CCD CMOS kind of camera, your strategy for focusing changes. So let's first look at what we usually do with the lens with the DSLR. Um, of course, once you're polar aligned and everything, you will be slewing to a bright star for the purpose of focusing, and then you'd run your capturing program. And if you're using lens with a DSLR, you can actually run Canon EOS utility for the purpose of focusing. So before you do that, the recommendation is that you do rough focus. You should know uh, where exactly the infinity point is on your lens. There is usually a marker, but understand that that infinity point is actually focuses past infinity. So you should be nearby there to start with. Otherwise, you will not see any star at all. Uh, when we slew to a bright star, etc., and where we expect to see a defocused star at least, something in the live view to begin with. So do a rough focus, and then you do not, and then some lenses require AF mode to be turned on for the rest of the procedure. Some lenses work even in MF mode, so you need to know what kind of lens you have and do you need to turn it on or turn it off. This is temporary. Ultimately, we will be shooting in manual focus mode always. So you turn the AF mode button on your lens, and then you start live view, whether you're using APT or Canon EOS utility, either way. If you're using APT, you do a focus aid. There are a couple of more tools in APT. You run the focus aid and something called a lens control. This is how it looks like in APT, lens control. Those of you who have used EOS utility, near the live view button, you would see similar lens control is available with you. So you slew to a bright star, you should see, it is there on the field, sort of defocused. And then you can use the lens controller. You can do fine focusing, or you can do go large, etc. Till the star is the smallest in the field of view. In APT, if you're using a focus aid, it will also show you some sort of a graph, so that can help you to know whether where you are when you are really in focus, or you're going out of focus, etc. By looking at the graph. And ultimately, you should switch back to MF mode before you start shooting your pictures. This is very important. A lot of people, including myself, has made that mistake, that I left the lens in AF itself and things went bad. In APT, you also have a feature called autofocusing. Basically, instead of you clicking on the buttons to focus, it actually can do that for yourself, for you. It looks at the FWHM of the star being captured using the focus aid, and it will do the lens control by itself. You can try that out. It works as well. When lens control is not possible, say for example, you are using a lens with a CCD CMOS camera, or you're using a telescope with a DSLR or CCD or CMOS, in this kind of cases, it's very highly recommended that you use a Batinov mask. What is Batinov mask? It's a focus aid. You can Google and find out. The only thing is that you need to buy or make a Batinov mask for your aperture, for your particular objective that you have particular scope camera that you're using, and you cannot reuse. I mean, it's kind of, some mask have a, it can grow or shorter. There's a holder kind of stuff, but something that I bought for 8-inch telescope, I cannot use that for lens, for example. So once you have button of mask put on, then there are many tutorials. I'm not going into the details of it, but uh, specific to APT, APT has a button of aid. So what it shows is it aligns the diffraction pattern on the screen with its own lines. It detects the orientation and etc. And it will align and it will tell you how far you are. So your job is to make this red and green overlap, uh, and then you're done. It's very cool and very helpful, and probably the best way to do focusing on with a scope, especially if you're using high focal length. If you do not have a button-up mask, then I suggest use sharp tap and go live view there. It works very well with the CCD that I use with ASI. So there again, you do a capture live view or you image according to the brightness of the star that you're. So usually, I'm going the alpha star of constellation, then alpha or beta star of the constellation, then I need to image something around 500 milliseconds or that kind of stuff. Then I go 200x zoom and then I run the FWH tracking. So it shows something like this graph. And then you change the focus control, etc. To go as low FWHM possible. It will also show you history, and that is not here in this particular photo that I put up. It will show you the best that you have achieved and the etc. So that's how we do focusing.
Subhankar, I have one question here.
Yes.
Suppose when I'm usually when anybody is starting their career in astrophotography at the beginning, so usually they'll start with DSLR and either a zoom lens or a kit lens, which are slow in nature. And with them, it is not always easy to find a star in the live view. So, what is the best strategy to
Yeah,
focus
so
it?
you should jack up your ISO, go as high ISO as you can. Actually, APT has its own live view simulation. It finds out, depending on the camera, the highest ISO to use. In that case, in the case of live view, the other problem, does that answer you? Typically, that is the thing. The problem with beginner, even I faced, is having that star in the field of view. Okay. So that is because at this point, if you're not focused, you cannot do plate solving. That is the topic that will come next. Okay. So if your pointing model, you just polar aligned, your pointing accuracy is not there. Even to do pointing model, etc., you have to focus. So you're basically focusing, and if your star is not pinpoint and etc., you will not see any star at all. So this is a problem with a shorter focal length. So there the star has to be pinpoint for you to see it in the live view. Okay, so you can increase the ISO, or if that does not work, what I ended up doing is I run an exposure of 1 second. Okay, or a couple of seconds, and in a loop. Okay. So then you should see defocused image being produced on the screen. Okay. So now you change your focus by hand or by control somewhat and get close before you turn on the live view. So that is the trick that I used to use, and I still use actually. In some cases, the other problem that the bright star that you want to focus on, it's not even in the live view, it's not even in the frame. So that problem you can solve. That is a problem with a longer focal length, and for that case, I suggest you must have the finder scope. And in the daytime, when you're setting up, you should have that finder scope properly aligned with your imaging scope or camera view, etc. So align that on a tree branch or something which is far away, so that later in the night you can trust that use the finder scope to bring the star in the center. And it will also be in the view.
Okay, okay. One more question is having filters in the imaging train, how does it affect the focus?
It doesn't actually. Probably would going to require a longer exposure. What kind of narrowband filter you're talking about? Or
Narrowband, yeah.
yeah, so it doesn't. In my experience, it will cut off the light. So you probably need a higher ISO or a longer exposure, um,
Okay.
etc. But the other problem in this relation, you need to remember, if you're using it a narrowband and you're going to use, let's say, HA and O3 or S2 on the same night, you need to know whether this filters are parfocal. So if you have focused on a HA and later in the night, okay, I've taken 1 hour of HA, let me go through O3. Remember, you have to focus again for O3.
Okay.
Unless the filters are parfocal. Even if the filters are parfocal, because you are putting them in the way you put them in the filter well, there could be still, they're never going to be put perfectly. There will be sub-millimeter level differences, because of which your focus could still be off. Okay. So first of all, you can, if you focus for one filter, whether it's going to be in focus for other filter, that documentation you need to look at the filter set when you're buying, whether they're parfocal or not parfocal. And if the documentation does not say, then some people's experience will say. So for example, by Googling only, I came to know that the ZW narrowband filter sets are not parfocal. And
Okay.
through experience also I have found, when if I focused on H alpha, if I go to O3 and shoot, the O3 stars are bloated. So they are not in. So you need to know that. I'm not sure about how the LRGB ones are parfocal or not. Typically, LRGB ones are parfocal, but it could be different.
Okay. One final question. So over the time of imaging session, should I readjust the focus because of temperature change? Because as and when the night gets colder, the lens or the telescope might contract and.
Yes, that happens, and you need to. And in my case, it happens all the time. So it's a pain. But in that case, you generally do not need to go to a bright star. So whatever star you have, find the brightest in your field of view and try to use that. For a DSLR, it's a problem. I understand. So if you plan it right, then before you go frame your object, you always do a mount syncing on the alpha star or beta star of the constellation you're imaging. Okay. So, and also sync the location where your target really is. If you're using plate solving to compose, the syncing will automatically happen. I'll explain that. But in addition to that, it's a good idea that during the night I might need to change focus, and for that purpose I need to slew back to the alpha star or beta star or nearby bright star. It's good to have that planned and have a sync done. So when you slew back to that star, you can come back where you're imaging without requiring too much of framing changes. You understand what I?
Yeah. Understood. Yeah.
So these are things that comes part of the planning. It has to be in your back of your mind. These are things that can happen through the night, and how am I going to go around it, and what is my plan really? Yeah. So in practice, when you're starting out, I never thought of all these things. So when I encountered with a problem like this, then I started thinking, okay, so next time what should I do? Yeah, practice makes it perfect. Any more question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, Udayan, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I joined 10 minutes late, so I think I missed a little bit of the introduction. My question is, have you explained FWHM, or you are going to talk about it?
FWHM stands for full width at hub maximum.
Right.
Okay. I will just do a search and explain it to you. FWHM. Okay, full width at hub maximum. So when you this is the okay, why it does not open full screen?
That's a smaller image, so that's why. Click on the image again.
No, it's not opening.
No, click on the image.
Let me
I'll
look
tell you.
This is a open image, a new tab. Okay. So you can see, right? So basically, when you go look at a star in focus, it falls on your pixels, right? So if you plot that flux or distribution, then it has this bell curve kind of stuff. So FWHM is full width at the half maximum of that curve. Wherever that curve is, at the half of its maximum
Okay.
intensity, and the full width of that. So this is the full
Okay.
width at half maximum. Okay. So this is a measure of seeing and the star focus and etc.
Right.
Now this is the crux. No matter what bright star you have in the sky, okay, or the stars of different brightness, this is a question naturally came to my mind and I actually did a research on it. That will my different stars show different FWHM? No, they'll all show same FWHM for that duration when you are seeing it. It depends on your seeing and turbulence and etc. But all stars, no matter what brightness, is supposed to show the same FWHM. Okay.
Okay.
But there is a caveat here. You should not be doing exposing. The exposure needs to be proper. So there is no clipping or you're not overexposing and stuff like that.
Okay.
I think I had, yeah. So this is, I think I had a distribution. I can share this link offline with you. So this paper actually talks about a lot about FWHM and the distribution of different kind of stars. Okay, where the ADU would change, the brightness would change depending upon how bright the star is.
Right.
But the FWHM is fixed. Okay, so see, the FWHM has nothing to do with the brightness value. It's basically distribution. Okay,
Right.
So that distribution is what we see here, and the way we measure it, the half maximum of that distribution from 0 to the maximum value.
Okay.
Width at the half maximum and the full width, not half width. So
Okay.
full width at the half maximum.
So how do you use this in while you're focusing on a star, while you're setting focus for the night on a particular star, so that
You look for the lowest FWHM setting.
possible?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So as you change your focus, it will show the FWHM currently recorded.
Okay.
Okay. So your aim is to go lower, the lowest
Okay.
possible.
And what is called a good or average FWHM?
No, see, that depends on your seeing, right?
No, in general, maybe speaking in general terms.
No, it is always limited by your seeing. See, that I explained last.
Yes, I got it. Yes.
Okay, so the
Yes.
moon, for example, is half a degree. Okay,
Right.
in your sky. So you know it is half a degree, and there is a way to measure it half a degree. The stars, no matter what brightness they are, they're much far away.
Correct.
Okay? They are point source of light. If there was no atmosphere, you would see them as a point source of light. Okay.
Okay.
That point source of light, when it comes through the atmosphere, it gets splattered around. How much it is going to get splattered around depends on the seeing.
Right.
If
So if
your
you're
seeing is 4 arc seconds, it's going to get splattered by 4 arc seconds. There's nothing you can do about it.
So you can say that in a way, FWHM values also measure the seeing. Whatever value readout you're getting, it is also telling you that is your seeing.
Exactly, it is.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so if you remember, Doctor some days ago had actually posted a nice little picture of APT showing the FWHM of a star.
Okay.
And it was showing 1 arc second.
Yes, yes, yes.
And he was saying the seeing is very good. Nothing
Yes.
but that. That's it. So in his
Okay.
case, when he captured that screenshot, he was in focus and not over saturated,
Okay.
not saturated the star, and hence it was showing 1 arc second in focus, at focus. So if you're defocused, of course, it's going to take a little more space on the
Right.
pixels on your sensor. So that's not when you should say, this is the seeing. Okay.
Right. Right. Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Okay. So we go to a very interesting topic now. It's plate solving. So plate solving. Why do you need plate solving in modern days? When I don't do mount pointing algorithm. So every mount has this two star orientation. What is that called? Two-star alignment and three-star alignment, etc. That is not a polar alignment. It's for pointing alignment. So basically, after you have finished your two-star or three-star alignment, going through the documentation and the procedure of your mount, and then you salute your target, you can expect your target to be in the center of your view. Now, doing that during for astrophotography is it's a time-consuming thing. So I would rather use the time to do my framing and composing rather than spending time on pointing, building the pointing model. So that two-star, three-star alignment, whatever mount offers, is also called terminology building the pointing model. So I rather depend on plate solving. So basically, plate solving is something like I ask the mount to go to a slew to a target area that I want to image, and then fire up a program which actually uh, takes a picture of that sky, and then it goes to its database to find out the actual array and take and the position of the center of that picture, and then it compares. The mount thinks he's at the location, but in reality, it is actually at some other location. So then it will tell the mount, hey, you know what? You think you are here, but actually you are there. So sync yourself with the its error, and then please go to the target where you're supposed to be. So the moment you sync, the mount then adds a sync point, or it builds its pointing model. And the next time when you ask it to go, it will have the frame, have the it will be near the place where you want to shoot at. So this always need not happen in one shot, but it will probably take in a couple of iterations, especially in the longer focal lengths. Uh, but the algorithm is same. Okay, so right now I use astrophotography tool as my imaging software. So as of yesterday, actually, the new version came yesterday. Uh, astrophotography tool, or APT, has three programs, support for three programs within itself. I mean, you don't have to leave the APT to do plate solving. Um, ASPS is one of them. PS2 is another, and the new one that they now support is ASTAP, ASTAP. So using any of the three, you can do your plate solving. But before astrophotography started having support for plate solving and different kind of plate solving programs, I started using AstroTortia. So they supported AstroTortia and an external program for a long time. And AstroTortia is one of the initial people who brought the very famous what is that called, the cloud-based plate solving engine, to brought that to desktop kind of stuff. So you can run your local server and local data, have your local database to do the plate solving. So before I describe all these things, and you can refer to my presentation later, but I would rather go and show you a demo and actually set up everything and explain things there. Okay. Okay, so you're able to see my desktop, right? So let me fire up my mount first. I'm going to use a simulator because I'm not really connected to any mount or camera right now. So I'm going to use a simulator. Okay. All right. So I have the EQMod ASCOM simulator. I assume this is my mount and it's park, and then you start tracking. Okay, so next I will fire is CDC Cartes. And connect to my, it's already set as a use EQMod simulator as a telescope. So you just connect. Okay, and track telescope. Okay, so currently it's near the pole. Okay, so next would be firing a capture program for which is it would be APT. Okay, leave that, and then we fire astrotortia. Okay, so before I begin describing astrotortia download and setting up is kind of involved. And instead of describing this in this presentation, I have a very good tutorial of astrotortia installation and what all you need to install, etc. by Light Vortex Astronomy. And I have included that in the reference section at the end of the slides. So you can follow the instructions there and install everything that is required for astrotortia. So let's say, why there are two, okay. Okay, so let's say I want to go to an object which is in
Deep Sky Clock event closing.
Okay, that's APT saying something. So SH2302, it's a Dolphin Nebula in Canis Major. That is what I will use for doing this demo. So I asked them my mount to slew there, and it's slewing. So, and you can see it is going there. Somewhere here it would be. Where is Canis Major? Orion.
It's in the center.
It's in the center. Why am I not seeing? Oh, it's here. Okay. Yeah, Sirius. Somewhere here it would be. Somewhere here. Yeah. Yeah. So once it is there, so this is what I would do in the field. So use the CDC to ask it to go to the object that I want to image, and then immediately run astrotortia connected to the scope, EQSCOM simulator. Okay. For this demo, I'm using file open dialog as the camera, but ideally I would be using astrophotography tool from here. So after you have installed astrotortia, there are a couple of things that you need to pay attention to in your settings here. So one of them is how much of exposure you need. This depends on the sky conditions and the camera and the scope and the focal length and F ratio, everything. So you need an exposure in which you are able to detect a good number of stars. What is a good number of stars? As per astrotortia uh, author, it says here in the ballpark figure of 100 to 200 to 500 objects. So that's a lot. Okay. Okay, so I have done much less than that. I have done plate solving with less than 100 stars. So basically you need to change your exposure accordingly. So this kind of the current setting of 10 seconds works for me for the CCD, the CMOS camera that I use, ASI 1600. For that, at gain of 200 with offset 50, 10 seconds exposure seems to work. By the way, at the time I'm doing all these things, my camera is already cooled. Okay. So then the next settings that you have to pay attention to this is the first one is the scale units. It must be in degree width, deg width. Don't have anything else. I don't know what is the default one. If the default one is not deg width, you need to change it to deg width. Okay. Then comes the scale minimum and the scale maximum. These are really bad values put, very wide values put in the default one. This should be your minimum field of view for the scope camera combinations that you're using, and the maximum field of view. Around a few fractions less and the few fractions more. That's all. So for the camera that I am using, 300 mm f2.8 using ASI 1600. That's the shot I will be demoing it. The field of view, the wider is around 3.5 degree. At the shorter edge, it's around 2.6 degree. So I have configured 2.5 to 3.75. Okay. Search radius in the default case is 180 degree, which means the entire sky. You don't want to search such a long sky. It takes a lot of time. So it should be less than 15 degrees. No, 15 degrees is a good value. But remember, it also depends on your pointing accuracy of your mount. So I asked you to slew to SH2 30, sorry, SH2 308 here. But if the mount actually goes and says this is where SH2 308, which can happen due to some other kind of error, then this degree you need to know how much error your mount is capable of having in its pointing accuracy. So 15 degree radius is good enough for most mount, but if your mount is behaving really weird and you might need to increase that, but certainly having the entire sky 180 degree is probably not the right choice. Okay. Then comes the custom options. Before I go to custom options, the JNOW or J2000, this should match whatever is configured for your mount. So in my case, it is configured to be, it's not here, I think, but it's configured to be J2000. So that's what you configure here. It should match with your mount. Then we come at the custom options. The N no plots and minus in none is already there in the default one. And the sigma is set to 1 when you run for the first time. The sigma is basically a threshold of noise floor. So if you increase the sigma more, for lower value of sigma, the more smaller scale structure would be considered to be star. So if the sigma is too low, you run the risk of detecting noise as stars. So what should be a good sigma value? It again depends on your camera, your exposure, your noise profile, etc. So DSLRs are a little bit a problem because at this time, at this temperature, they will have a lot of noise. So probably you should try with a higher sigma. And the objects, this particular stuff basically tells that out of all the objects detected as stars, you use the 50 of them. Now, which 50? That is what the minus R says. It basically tells AstroTortier to first sort the stars according to brightness, and then minus obj 50 will say that use the top 50 of them. Okay. Typically in the field, I would tick all of them. That you sync the scope after you solve the image. Please reslew again to the target and keep reslewing to the target until the target is in the 1 arc minute away from the center. But for this demo, I just click on the sync scope. I don't want to resolute the target. It will keep doing the same thing. And then I want to capture and solve. Now, when I click on this with the file open dialog, it will ask me to select a file. So, which I will take, already take an image of SH2308. Remember, this image is a 300-second exposure. Okay, so it has a lot more star than I would ideally have in a 10-second exposure. Okay, so when it starts solving, at this time it's better to open a log viewer. I cannot. Pay attention to the stuff. You need to peel your eye and look at this window. It would say extracting sources, and then it would say this many sources have been found. So from my image, it has found 2873 sources that it thinks they are stars. Since it's a 300-second exposure, there are actually a lot of stars. Okay, that value, according to AstroTortier documentation, should be around 200, but I think about 100 is good enough. Yeah, so it has now says that it is solved, and the RA deck, etc., is calculated. I'll close, and this was the target location, and the current location that he has found from solving the image is this. Now I would show what happens if my sigma is too low. Okay, so let's say it is 20. Okay, and I select the same file. So this time, because I put my sigma too small, only found some weird number of, only found 4 sources. I don't know why. This is where people get frustrated because it does not, and say the AstroTortier does not work. It's not able to solve. It's basically your sigma and your exposures are not hand in hand. Okay. Any questions? No questions. Okay. So hope you like this little thing. So this is what I use. I would change back my settings. Okay. And close AstroTortier. So now I'm going to show you how we can do the same thing in APT. So I don't have a camera connected, so I'm not connecting a camera. So I'm going to do blind solving of an image that I've already taken. So go open the same image. Okay. So this is the Dolphin Nebula SH2308 in O3 in Canis Major. And so when you run the point craft from the gear tab, first you need to go through the APT documentation to configure all the 3 available solutions. So in short here, the ASPS can do both near and blind solving. What is near solving? Near solving is when you know a scope position and you want to solve something near that. Blind solving is when you do not know the scope position and you want to find out where exactly the scope position is. So basically it will do search in all visible sky. So in this case, when you're using APT, I'm not connected to camera from the APT, or neither I'm connected to mount. So I'm going to do blind solving. So the ASPS can do near and blind solving. So, no, I think ASPS. So PS2 can do near solving. The ASTAP can do again a near and blind solving. So if you don't have these 2 checkbox, checked, then by default APT uses ASPS for blind solving, and by default APT is going to use ASTAP as for near solving. So let's first show you with ASPS what happens, how that works. So I'm not going to check this particular button, but before you go there, sorry, get tools. So in tools, you need to set your focal length properly. If you're connected to real camera, uh, it will probably pick up. If you're going to use a Canon lens, that's going to probably pick up. If it is not, you should configure your focal length. This particular image was taken using 300 mm f2.8, so I'd set the focal length to be 300 f2.8. And if you're connected to a camera in reality, then it would show the correct CCD pixel in microns and etc from its database. Otherwise, you should configure. So I have these two things configured. This is required for plate solving using any of this. So, and then I click on blind. It started solving. Usually I should see a pop-up window. I don't see it. Okay, let's wait. Started solving. Should take about a minute or so. It's taking long.
Image solved.
Great. So that's how once the image is solved, it will mark the center position, the array deck uh, of the center of the field of view, and that's your center position. It also marks the which direction is north in the image. Okay, so let's close this because I want this values to go away. And before I open and show the
Deep sky clock event.
I don't know what's that. Okay, so this time again, I want to use ASTAP for blind solving. It's a new program that has come out yesterday. Okay, I do the same thing. Click on the blind. So now it shows up a pop-up window. Okay, so the blind solving here, unlike Astrophotography, it actually searches the entire 180-degree sky.
Image solved.
So there you go. Pretty fast. 39 seconds versus 67 seconds versus how much was the Astrophotography? 42 seconds. Yeah. So with doing 180-degree search, so it's pretty good. So once you have solved it, something nice here is that you can show the location on the on CDC. For that, you have to configure in APT settings and planetarium. I said I want to use Curtis for that purpose. So, and it will show you with the where exactly in the sky that you're located. So, in this demo, everything is proper, but in the field, if it was pointing somewhere here, you would know that it was pointing somewhere here, and you need to actually go there. Okay, so in APT, you can do all that stuff that even Astrophotography does, that you solve and then slew back and then solve again to confirm it, etc., etc. So that is, I think, the solve plus and auto plus are good, or you can select some objects from the list of database, and then you can do go to plus plus and it will do the same thing. Okay. So let's go back to our presentation. Okay. So this is with AstroTortia settings that you have to use, and etc. Any questions? Are people there? Let me see. Okay, people are there.
No, Subhankar, it was actually very clear. So yeah, no questions.
Okay, cool. Okay, so next we move on to camera settings. Here I'm going to talk only about the DSLR settings. Uh, CCD settings are pretty simpler, much simpler. You don't have to bother so much about it. Most of these settings matter even for what kind of astrophotography you're doing, even for taking star trails or fixed tripod or shots. These settings are valid. So your program mode should be manual. This is the wheel that you turn on the top of the camera. You are always in manual. Autofocus, if it's in the camera or lens, it has to be manual or off. White balance, typically we use daylight or a custom. If it's a modified camera, we would use a custom white balance. But how do you generate that custom white balance is on a sunny day during midday, you point the camera to a gray card. Or if you don't have a gray card, you can use a gray t-shirt or a white t-shirt and take a shot. And then tell the camera to use that photo as the white balance. This is important for modified camera. For unmodified camera, you would use daylight as the white balance normally. Understand that this is only for the review. Whatever is coming out of your, if you're reviewing in the back of the camera, or if you're reviewing in a DPP, that's where it matters. But every shot that you're taking is raw, and in the processing time, all those white balance informations and everything is gone. It's your processing then. Your drive should be one shot, not continuous or anything else. This would change for a fixed tripod, or you'd probably be doing 2-second timer or 10-second timer kind of stuff. But for to take shots on a tracked platform, it is usually one shot. Your ISO 800 to 600 for deep sky, nebulas, and galaxies depends on what kind of dynamic range of the object that it has. Probably 800 if you're shooting bright objects like Rosette or Orion Nebula, but probably go 1600 for fainter stuff. Galaxies are usually to 1600. For star clusters, it matters. The star colors matter. You don't want to lose the dynamic range, and you want to retain those star colors very well. And hence, the ISO recommendation is lower. You should not be shooting star clusters in 800, 600 kind of stuff. You should lower it to 400 or even lower if you can too. Doesn't matter. Metering doesn't matter. Exposure compensation also doesn't matter. The very important one is a mirror lockup that you want to enable. So what it does is when you press the shutter or ask the camera to take the shot, you need two presses or two signals. The first one would lock up the mirror, and then the actual shot, the shutter would open. Quality, as I said, it is always raw. You may shoot JPEG in addition for your quick processing or quick viewing or quick sharing, etc. But raw must always be there. You must shoot raw to be able to have the entire array of processing available to you. In camera sharpening must always turn off. Red eye detection definitely turn off. No flash. No white light to be used in astrophotography anywhere. Long exposure, noise reduction turn off because we will be taking dirt. ISO noise reduction turn off. Image review turn off. The last one is important if you're using a in-camera battery, because you do not want typically image review stays there for 3 seconds and all. It actually burns battery. And not only that, in the dark, it actually spoils your dark adaptation of anybody who's around. And you don't really need to see the image review in the back of the camera. You can see it in your capturing program. It will download the image and show you. So you don't need it. Turn it off. Aperture depending upon your lens, but if most lens needs stopping down. For telescope, anyway, it doesn't matter. Exposure would be bulb. It's going to be set by your capturing program, and it depends on the subject. One of the thing that probably you would need to know if you're sharing the same DSLR for astrophotography usage as well as your daytime photography, uh, just pay attention to the number of things that you have to turn off, turn on, uh, between your daytime photography to the nighttime photography. So it makes sense to write a small card and keep it with you. These are things I need to modify. Typically, I use a different camera altogether. I don't want to mix. I don't want to forget and make a mistake in the field. Uh, any question? No. Okay. So next we move on to auto guiding. All right. Just a second. Present. Yeah. Auto guiding. PhD is the tool to go to. I don't think we use any other tool. Just a second. Something is wrong with my screen setup. I think somebody is taking up. Close these programs. Shut down. Present. Now it is taking full screen. Good. Okay. So PhD is the tool that we go to for doing auto guiding. Auto guiding setup we have explained. Auto guiding as a concept we have explained. So now we are talking about how to use the program to do the job. So when you when you run PhD2 for the first time, it will throw up this connect equipment dialog, and there is this nice little manage profile button here. And you can use create a new equipment profile in PhD2. Either you can just dial in the values or use a wizard. I suggest you use the wizard as a starting point if you're very new to PhD2, because it will ask you a series of questions, and it will take the dark files and etc. etc. It will build the dark library, and you're all set after that. So once you have set up things, there are a few settings that you need to pay attention to. Your search region should be usually 15. The default value is good enough. I don't like star mass detections. So in the place where we image from, it can get cloudy without notice, and the star gets lost, and the PhD then starts hunting for the star. And what happens is it basically takes it away from the field of view or the composition that I've done. So I do not have it enabled. So let it lose the star, but stay where it is supposed to be is my way of doing it. But you can have it enabled, and it can search. The next important thing is you should ensure that your focal length is correct. And actually, there is somewhere. Okay, so that's next. Okay, your focal length of your guide camera or guide whatever you're using as the objective for guiding is that focal length is correct. If you're using a OAG, it is the same focal length as your primary scope. Um, and then before you start to do a calibration, go check the advanced tab. There again, you should see all these things are properly configured or not. It is only to check, because if you're used, the new wizard, and it will ask you to connect the camera, detect the camera, where it can connect to the camera by itself through the driver. It can find out all those values by itself. So you do not really need to enter anything by yourself, but you're supposed to verify and cross check. Focal length anyway you have to enter by yourself. Uh, so the calibration steps, you should always do 12. I'm not sure what's the default one, but I don't think it's 12. I think it's 10 or 8 or something like that. Uh, Guide speed should match. If you're using ASCOM, it will read from the ASCOM. Otherwise, you should read what is set in your mount. And so once you do this, your declination where you're going to ultimately do the calibration, I would come with the recommendation. It's always in the celestial equator, on there or thereabout. So for me, it is always 0, and that's where you are also requested to do your calibration, etc. And once you have done this little settings properly, there is few useful settings. Check this auto restore calibration. What happens is every time you run PhD with the same set of equipments, it will remember the previous calibration was done for that set of equipment or that profile of equipments, and it will restore the calibration by itself. It is really good for doing polar alignment, because at the time of polar aligning, I don't want to do recalibrate unless I'm not required. So from the previous night, it will already would have saved its calibration, and to do quickly get on with the polar alignment, I use the restored calibration itself. But I don't use that calibration for the rest of the night. So once my polar alignment and etc. is complete, I would do the clear mount calibration and redo the calibration again for that night, because there would be a little bit of changes in the load and etc. I can reuse the calibration for polar alignment purpose, but I don't want to reuse the calibration for imaging purpose. But once I redo the calibration for this night, the next night that I go, I would reuse it for polar alignment again. So that's how I go about it. Unless otherwise you know what you're doing, don't check all these things. Please read the documentation about all of them before you check or uncheck. The default settings are pretty good. Works for most of them, most of the mounts. Then you would hit on the guide button. I don't know why this shows up. The guide button, and it will start doing the calibration. It will start moving the star in the north, and then sorry, first in the east-west direction, and then in the north-south direction. And, you will see that happening here. And then ultimately, when the guide calibration is complete, it will show this green cross here. So that means the guiding has started. So once the guiding has started, you see some of the parameters here, which you can modify, and on the runtime you can change to control your guiding. And you also see certain things here. The two of the important thing is the RMS error, that is the peak-to-peak error that it is observing in terms of both in terms of arc seconds as well as the pixel size, as well as in terms of pixels on the guide chip. And the RA oscillation, I'll explain about it a little in a while. Right. So once you have done for the first time, you have done a calibration and your guiding has started, I strongly recommend you to run the guiding assistant. It's once you run it, it will direct you by dialogues what all you have, what all it is doing, what all you have to do, and etc. So just follow the directions that is coming on the screen. One of the thing that it does is it tells you what is your residual polar alignment error. That's number one. Number two, it also calculates the deck backlash. So most mount have a declination backlash on the deck side. So it's important that you tell PhD 2 about it, make it learn it, and so it can use that information for correcting in DEC. So one of the things that we control, have a control here, is the mean motion value here. Uh, okay, the default values may not be right for your setup. So this is something that you may have to change depending upon your exact setup that you're using, your guide camera and your imaging camera and the individual scopes, that is. So basically what min motion is, it is the minimum amount of movement that must happen before you want page 2 to issue a correction. In simplicity, that's what it means. So how do you arrive at that? So basically, everything is ultimately on the imaging camera and imaging scale, but the guiding is happening using the guide camera and the guiding scope. But your evaluation, whether your guiding is good or not, is essentially you look at your final image, and from there you say it. So you start by calculating your imaging scale. For example, here it is a 44. I'm taking all these values for an example here. Okay, these are, don't take this as a truth. So you have to calculate yours. So let's say it is 0.44 arc seconds per pixel, pretty small ASP, and you calculate your guiding scale. Then let's say this is only a starting point suggestion. Don't take it as a gospel truth or a absolute recommendation. You have to come out with your own thing. So let's say that you say that I don't want I want the correction to be issued if the movement is more than 75% of my imaging scale. Sorry, here it's supposed to be okay. I think the map here is a little wrong. It's supposed to put 75 instead of put 80. But anyway, you understand the thing. So calculate how much it is in on the imaging scale or imaging camera. Then you convert that to a guide camera. It turns out to be so many pixels. So now this is the peak-to-peak allowable error. But the mean motion is that you see here is in terms of radius. Okay, so you need to half that. It becomes in terms of radius. Like I said, it's a starting point and not an absolute recommendation. This is where you can start, and then you have to adjust based on your seeing, which will change every night. Okay, so don't assume whatever value you have used and it was fantastic guiding is going to work this night. It may not. And other guiding performance. So what should guide you? It's basically you look at these oscillations and how often the corrections are being issued, which directions they are being issued, and etc. etc. Look at, peel your eye on this graph, and from there you try to find out. Okay. Some recommendation for sorry, here, yeah, some recommendation. Like I said, you must start with configuring the correct focal length, pixel size, build library. This too would be taken care if you're using the wizard and enter correct values. If you have ASCOM mount, connected mount, use the ASCOM pulse guiding over ST4 guiding. Guide exposures, typical recommendation 2 to 5 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds. If it's bad seeing, we go higher. If it's a good seeing, we go stick to around 2 seconds. But we don't go lower than that. You will end up chasing the seeing, and trails will be because of that. Always auto select star. So what PhD does is it has its own calculator inside it. It will calculate FWHM and etc. and brightness and saturation, etc. Saturations particularly. The guiding does not work well with the saturated star. So you need to choose unsaturated star, which is spread a little bit over a few pixels. So that kind of star is good. So like PhD 2, select the star for you rather than you selecting the star. Always calibrate near the celestial equator, no matter where you're imaging. Uh, Calibrate right after you have done your polar alignment and your focusing, etc. And then you do plate solving and go to the framing. That's what I do. So calibrate, since celestial equator meridian junction is also used for polar alignment, that is the time to finish up the calibration as well. So use the correct pointing. If you're pointing east, be east of meridian, etc. And you need to redo calibrations. So whether or not you're reusing calibrations overnight, and even in the during the night, if you have changed something in your imaging setup, you need to redo calibrations. If your mount has periodic error corrections, turn it on. In this context, also remember PhD2 has an algorithm in RA, which is predictive PEC nowadays. The very latest version of PhD2 has it. So if you're using PPEC in PhD2, then you should not use PEC on your mount or your mount control software. Okay, then they both will fight. But using PEC on your mount and using some other algorithm other than PPEC on PhD2 is good and it's recommended. Guide speeds configurations usually between this. I use 0.9. Don't guide at more than an X. It is actually going to cause jerking in the array. You don't want that. Any sort of compensation stuff that you have on the mount or mount control software, usually turn it off. Let PhD2 learn all these things and let it control, because if any sort of compensation that is available on the mount will do it on its own over and above of the guide corrections that pulse or guide corrections that is issued by the PhD, with PhD having no knowledge of it. So we do not want that situation. We want PhD2 to be in full control of the mount at all times. Some more suggestions. Under correction is better than over correction. Always start with, don't try to be too tight with your settings. Try with moderate, conservative settings. And if that works, you go a tighter one bit more, one bit more. You need to, these practices are good because like everything, seeing decides everything, and the seeing is not going to be constant from night to night. So you need to build understanding over a period of time, of course, by practice, that what works under what kind of conditions. Okay, so for the beginner, I would suggest you use a larger min motion than you have calculated in the previous page. You use lower aggressiveness and lower hysteresis. See your guiding performance, see the actual image that you have taken, and then go tighter. Like I said in the very beginning, and I've been saying it, everything is difficult as you increase the focal length and load. So higher focal length means your guiding requirements are also tighter. So there are two things in the plot, this plot here. One is RMS error and one is RA oscillation. So RMS error basically is a clear indication of your seeing conditions. If that peak to peak is certain arc seconds, so that is your seeing. So that much splattering of the star is happening. On the other side, RA oscillation says it's basically a probability or odds that your next RA movement is going to be in the opposite direction of the last RA movement. Okay, so if you're overcorrecting or too aggressive in your guide parameters, so what happens is a zigzag pattern. So suddenly you make a east correction, the next correction will be at the west, and then again in the next east, and then again at the west. So this zigzag pattern basically would means overcorrection, and your RA oscillation will tend towards value of 1.0. For a T corrected, no periodic error or low periodic error or periodic error corrected perfect guiding, this RA oscillation value would be near 0.5. Okay, so how do you say my guiding is fantastic? There are two things. First, your image says there are no trails and your stars are perfect, round, and etc. And you look at the array oscillations. If it is 0.5, then only you have a perfect guiding. So normally, you can expect or try to have this value within 0.3 to 0.4 range. Like everything, lots of tools, lots of software we use. PhD2 is actually a great tool and a great software in astrophotography domain. I mean, there's hardly anybody who does not use it. It has a lot of things, a lot of theory, a lot of settings, etc. You have to read the manual shelf files, and there are plenty of how-to videos in the web. And plus, we are also here in the BAS forum to help you. There are the very good presentation done by PhD2 authors themselves. One of them I have linked here. You can go through this pretty long presentation. Remember, guiding cannot correct these errors. It cannot correct seeing your hardware related troubles. And if you have flex, you have a very large backlash related trouble. I remember Kitty's older mount used to have a very large backlash, field rotation, etc. In spite of doing everything right, and if you think that you have done everything right, and you're still having trails, there are ways to find out whether that trail is due to guiding or due to something else. Now, instead of going into details of it, there is a very good talk given by Craig Stark, the author of the original PhD software, the Push-Air Dummy. It used to be, actually PhD stands for Push-Air Dummy. It's a name given by him. He's a funny guy. So there's a nice talk. I have given the link of it, the scripts of the talk on Cloudy Night's article section. Please go and read. So it tells you different conditions. So what you have to eliminate. If you have a trail, if the trail is in this directions and this direction, this kind of trail, it could be due to so many different reasons. So go through that article. It's very good. It's good to know the different ways your image can have trails, not just wrong guiding or too aggressive guiding or too soft a guiding, etc. Any questions at this time?
Can you just revisit RMS error, because you said it is telling us about the seeing conditions.
Yeah, because
no, my question is it is also a measure of your periodic error, right?
Yes. So I am in a P-corrected mount. It would be indicator of your seeing conditions. Yeah, it's a measure. I'm not saying it's an indicator. It's not a measure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I run my pick all the time. So residual, anything else, yeah, even your flex and anything that you can correct using guiding, and RMS error is basically includes all of them. Yeah, you're right.
All right.
Okay. Any more questions on PhD? Okay, so then move on to dithering. So dithering is a concept where we move the scope of the camera by few pixels randomly. Randomly is the keyword here, between exposures. So why do we do it? So ultimately, we're going to stack a lot of exposures. That's the primary goal of astrophotography here. And the sensors have this kind of pattern noise. I'll show the example of those pattern noise. It has hot and cold pixels, and you may have cosmic ray heats, and etc. So by shifting the individual exposure, we are trying to mitigate that problem. So if you don't shift, the hot and cold pixels are going to be there, right at the positions. And when you stack, the hot and cold pixels are going to remain hot and cold pixels in the stacked result as well. Now, to be able to remove that, you can remove it in post-processing. and for that to happen, you have to characterize those hot and cold pixels and etc. How you characterize pattern noise, I explained yesterday. For DSLR, it means taking a lot of bias frames, but the same taking a lot of bias frames does not work for CMOS cameras all the time, because even the bias changes direction. Uh, if you see the pattern noise that vary from exposure to exposure. Uh, so the uh, so the uh, strategy that we use is that we would shift every frame by a little bit between exposures and randomly, and ultimately when you stack, things are going to get averaged out as normally, and you would get rid of the pattern noise and hot and cold pixels and cosmic ray hits, etc. But none of this is going to work uh, unless you stack a lot of exposures. Okay, this is not for stacking some a few exposures, 10, 15, and don't expect to see massive changes. It will still change, it will still help you, but this works well when you have a lot of exposures. But it comes at a cost, because since you're going to move the scope and the camera between exposure, and at the same time you're doing a guiding, uh, uh, the whole purpose of guiding was I want to keep the scope and the camera pointed at the one constant place. That's why we have a closed loop, feedback loop, and etc. etc. Now you're telling me that I need to move between exposures. Okay, so it has to be done by the whichever software you're using for guiding. In this case, page 2. So there needs to be a time spent between, first of all, between exposure to do this dithering. You ask page 2, hey, I want to dither. So that means move my pointing by so many pixels. And then also you have to give it a time for it to settle the guiding again. So that time could be somewhere between 30 seconds to 1 minute in some cases. It all depends on your exposure, durations of guiding, etc., etc. And that comes at a cost. Think about this way. So if your exposures are 1 minute and you want to do dither every frame, so basically you're in effect, your every exposure becoming 2 minutes instead of 1 minute. So 1 minute exposure, and then 1 minute to do your dithering and settling. Then again a 1 minute exposure. So in a 1 hour period, you thought I could take 60 shots, but you end up taking only 30 shots. So that is the cost part of it. Now, don't take my word just as I'm saying. The dithering settling does not take that long. It depends on your equipment and etc. If you're taking, let's say, 5-minute shots and 10-minute shots, waiting for 30 seconds is not a bad idea. Then, of course, since you're shifting around the frames, ultimately your cropping would have your post-processing time. You need to crop the frame so that you don't show up all those different cages that Kirti will explain when he does the post-processing video. So your framing can't be too tight. So if your object is entirely fills the field of view, you need to be aware that you're dithering and some of the portions of your frame has to be thrown away. So you frame accordingly. So if you have two objects on two sides or two corners of your field of view, you need to be aware of it. And if you're doing multi-image, multi-night imaging like I do, then again you have to remember that your angle cannot change too much, because ultimately you're going to throw away some pixels and you may find it to be problematic because you're dithering as well. Okay, so here is an example I got from Jerry Lottery's article. So this is how dithering looks like when you blink images. This is a set of 3, I guess. This galaxy looks like the one in the Leo triplet NGC 3628. I can't be sure. So, but this is how you shift around the stack. This couple of, if you can you see there's 2 red spots here? These are the hot pixels, which stay where they are, where the image is actually moving around. So when you stack, this things is going to go away. I'm not sure if you can make out the image on the left is taken using dithering, and the image on the right is not taken using dithering. So the pattern noise of the sensor uh, is shown here. There's a vertical raindrops like pattern. Can you guys see? Can somebody confirm that you can see this?
Yeah, yeah. It's seen very clearly.
Yeah. So that comes from the pattern noise of the sensor. So if you dither, that is going to go away. If you don't dither, that is going to be staying. It's very hard to remove that noise. Okay. So in the PhD 2, there are certain settings that you have to do for dithering. Always choose random. There is a spiral. In occasions, you have to choose spiral. I'll come to that, briefly mention, but typically we want to do random dithering, not a spiral dithering. There is also a check for RA only. You should not check this. So if you have a very bad mount with a very high deck backlash, then or you have a large polar alignment error because of which you have chosen to guide in deck only one direction, either south or north, and you do not want the direction to switch. That is the time you can choose RA only. But the point gets lost. I mean, this raindrop like pattern is going to happen even after dithering. If you're just doing, it would happen at a higher distance, but it still happen. So if you can, don't choose RA only. Yeah. So basically, to do good dithering, your mount must be able to do deck guide switching, and your deck backlash, if any, should be manageable by PhD2. PhD2 cannot do very large deck backlash corrections. So small amount of deck backlash corrections it can do. And for this to be learned by PhD2, you must run that guiding assistant. Okay. So typically, how many pixels should we move around? So you can see this here. It seems to be moving by quite a lot of pixels. You can make out this is not just 1 or 2 pixels. For the DSLR or CMOS kind of camera, it is recommended around 5 to 10 pixels on the imaging camera, remember. But the actual dithering is done by the PhD2, and it only knows the guide camera and the guide pixels, guide camera and the guide scope. So you need to convert this 5 to 10 pixels, let's say 5 pixels that I want to dither on the imaging camera. But you need to convert that to how many pixels it is on the guide camera and configure the same in APT or whichever program you're using for dithering or your imaging control. I'll show you the example there. So you basically calculate the imaging scale again, just like you calculated just now in motion. So you basically find the ratio between the two and convert this 5 pixels is how many pixels on the guide camera. That is the value you would configure in APT. Okay. Like I said, there are two costs. One is the settling time. So how do you arrive at the settling time? So RMS tells you, average error. So that is the average error it is saying for guide exposure. So every 3 seconds, when it calculated the distance by which the guide star has moved, average over that. So that is the that tells you the RMS tells you that is the amount error that it is seeing. So the settling time, when do you say that after dither the guiding has settled? When the error falls below that level. Okay. So if you have let's say moved the thing by 10 pixels on the guide camera, and your RMS is somewhere around 1 pixel, let's say, just for the calculation, and your guide exposures are 2 seconds. So you need to drop down from 10 pixels to 1 pixel in how many exposures is required. So 10 exposures are required. So that is 10 into 2 to 20 seconds. So basically, dither settling time then should be around 20 seconds. Okay, so that's how you arrive at it. Now the problem is RMS is going to change every night. So you can't have everything else remaining same. You can't have the same dither settle time to be configured in APT or etc. And whatever you configured the last night, expect that to change this night. So there again, if you go conservative and factor in that change in your calculation and put a little more than to be absolutely on the 20 seconds kind of age, it's better. So now, how many, on what basis do we dither? Do we dither every frame, or do we dither every certain frame, etc.? There is some recommendations given to you. If you have exposure 5 minutes and above, you dither after every frame. 30 seconds, 5 minutes plus 30 seconds doesn't make much of a difference. Okay, your 5 minutes exposure will become 5.5 minutes in total to take one exposure, including the dither stuff. If your exposures are around 3 minutes, you dither every 2 image. So basically, you dither once in 5 minutes. That's how the algorithm goes. I come to my last topic of the night. Any questions? Okay.
Yes. I have been waiting to ask my dithering question.
Okay. Just before you ask, give me 1 minute. I will show you where exactly you configure all these things in APT.
All right.
I'll run APT once more. Yeah. So if you go to gear and shift guide. Oh, sorry. Guide tab. So here, there are many guiding programs. For example, you choose page 2 guiding from here, and you need to turn on auto dithering. You have to turn this on for APT to enable dithering any frame. But then again, there is a plan level control. In a plan, you can say for that particular plan you want dithering on or not. That is in addition to this. This has to be on. Then you can control at the plan level whether to on or off. So dither distance is nothing but this one. Whatever you calculated, ultimately you want 5 pixels on an imaging camera. How many pixels is the guide camera? You calculate that, and that value you put it here. Okay. For PhD2, it depends on what kind of guiding program you're using. I'm assuming PhD2. That's what everybody uses. For that, you choose the value from here. Okay. And rest of the things, forget it. Then there's a stability comes. This is in pixels. Okay. And then this settling time. This is where you put the settling time. And the other stuff that we talked about, should we take every image or not image? That depends on your exposure. That's what you configure here. Okay. And do you want to dither right away after the image is taken? Usually yes, but in some cases you want to put a little delay. It's up to you. Okay, so this is what you do for configuration in APT. Yeah, your question, Udan.
Yes. So does dithering cause wear and tear to the mount? Is it harmful to the mount in the long run?
No, why?
I was just curious because if you are going to move your mount after every frame, and also
no, look at this way. The guiding also, it's going to happen at the guide speed. Okay, and guiding is going to move your mount every 2 seconds or every 3 seconds.
Right. So there is no issue of that.
No.
Okay.
Okay, again the full screen is gone. Why is it gone? I'm unable to understand why it is not going full screen. Okay, whatever. It's gone. So last topic of my presentation, taking flat. So you have taken, you have bought all the equipments. You have done put them together. We have done polar alignment. We have done plate solving. We have composed. We have taken shots. We have deterred. Now So basically, you've done everything about the light frames, and now to complete the night, you have to take the flats. So why do we take flats? Basically, there would be uneven illuminations and the dust motes. Focused. This is the dust on the sensor or on the filter or on the objectives, which basically causes some sort of a donut kind of shapes. And so we want to remove all these things and the uneven illumination, vigneting, and stuff like that. So that's why we take flats. How we take flats? Typical recommendations are typical what people do normally is take flats at dawn. Uh, the idea of taking flats is you have to expose to a evenly illuminated light source uh, at the same focus as you have taken your lights. So for the evenly illuminated light source at dawn is the dawn sky away from the east. So you look at the west, and if you're taking flats, sometimes we take flats during evening time also. You know, when the sun has set, at that time you'll be pointing towards east. But even at that time, and if you're really in a short focal length scope or lens, it can take a wide field of view, and sky has gradient. So hence we do things like this. It's a jugaad actually. We stretch a t-shirt, white t-shirt, our waist, and put a rubber band around it so that there is no creases or things like that. And that's what we use and point it towards the sky and take the shots. Also, this is helpful if the sky is cloudy and there is passing clouds and stuff like that. Uh, that you do not want your flat to get ruined because of gradients of passing clouds or cloud cover, etc. So this helps. Doing this helps, and this is what I would suggest everybody to try and do. But on a lens, small lens, doing this is a bit tricky. You should be very careful that you do not touch or change your focus. The focus ring is very close to the hood, and you need to be really, really careful. So how do you take flats with the DSLR and similar to this kind of setup? Ultimately, you do this contraption carefully, and then it helps to do this on while the camera and the lens is already on the mount. There are a lot of times we try to do it by holding it in hand. That is risky because you might touch the focus. You should keep the same ISO as your lights. Typically, from the recommendations that I have given, remember the recommendations that I've given here for camera settings. Where did that go? Yeah, so I'm talking with respect to this camera settings here. What all you have to change in the at the time of taking flats. That's how you see it. Yeah. So from there, you would change the program mode to AV. You will turn the drive to continuous. It was single shot chauffeur, and you'll disable the mirror lockup, and then you press the shutter button and take a 30 of them. It will be, if it's stored in the camera. That's typically what we do. But you can also use APT to do the same thing. And in that case, it would download. In that case, you do not need to change the mirror lockup and etc. Or the drive mode. But if you're taking by just pressing the shutter because you're doing a daytime shot of the sky, and you don't bother about shakes and etc. Exposures are going to be pretty fast, so you can do continuous shots and shoot 30 of them and be done with it. Doing it with a CCD or a CMOS kind of camera is a bit tricky, and even more tricky if you have a narrow band, because now the exposures are not going to be in a typical less than a second kind. No, it will be far more longer, multi-seconds. Sometimes it goes all the way up to a minute, depending upon the strength of your narrowband filter. If it's hardly going to let any light through, so you can kind of imagine. So same things. It should be same as your lights, again and offset and the temperature and etc. Uh, Doing this kind of setup in the morning is difficult for a CCD CMOS, and you need to wait a long time. If you don't like it, like I don't like it. So I use a EL panel for that reason also. But there is another reason. Uh, because the exposures are longer, I'm now going to need, build dark flats or flat darks. So in case of DSLR, you don't really care about doing the flat darks because flats are very short durations, and even though the duration can differ. So one flat is a 1/250 or 1/500. The next one could be 1/400, or next one, or next day, or whichever. But in case of CCD, since the flats are longer, it's a longer exposure, and you want to build flat darts, you want this exposure to be constant from night to night to night. I don't want to keep building flat darts for every night. It's not good. Hence, my source of light source has to be a constant one. So, which is why investing in a EL panel happened. Uh, Same suggestions as to you don't change your focus and etc. etc. APT has a CCD flats wizard that you can use to calculate the appropriate duration required for narrowband and for CCD CMOS to look at the ADU value, um, the maximum ADU and the half of that and etc. And it will calculate. It will automatically keep taking flats to as long as to the extent where the exposure is correct to keep the ADU distribution as required. And it will also create a plan for the next time. So that's handy tool to use. Okay, so this is an example of I have the same EL panel, and this is how we use it. Whether you use it in the dawn sky, for me, I use it in the dark. As soon as I've done focusing, I want to take the flats and be done with it, because I don't want to keep waiting for the morning. And the reason is, as you have, Vishwa asked the questions, would I need to change focus during the night? Yes, you need to change focus during the night. But the problem is, if you wait till the morning, that focus could change. It is not the focus, the last image that you have taken need not be the perfect focus that you have started with. So, you may throw out those images which is out of focus during the processing. But if you take flats at that time, it could be wrong for the correctly focused shots. So which is why I take flats right after I finish focusing, and for the reasons that I've already mentioned, and the reason that I want to take flats right after I finish focusing, I invested in the EL panel. These are actually available in India as well. Typically, the doctors use for seeing X-ray. So if you can get one such device, it will be very good. Yeah. So that brings me to conclusion of this presentation. Any questions on taking flats?
Hi, Subhankar. I have a few questions. Can you go to the previous slide, please? Yeah. No, one more slide. One more previous slide. One more. Yeah, thank you. So at the same ISO as your light. So why should it be same ISO as the lights? Can't we use a lower
I
ISO?
don't know. It can be lower. Actually, when I started, I used to do it at 200. Okay. For the DSLR, since the flats are very fast and you don't really bother, you're not going to do any dot subtraction. You don't really bother about the noise, etc. Only thing I'm interested in the distribution. So you can do it ISO 200. I keep the ISO same because it's faster. I want flats to take faster and faster.
Okay.
Just the time thing, so that the dark business does not even become a factor.
Okay. And the program mode AV. So do you set? I mean, should we set the EV at -1 or 0 or?
No, 0. So
0.
no compensations at all.
Okay.
So if you're controlling from APT, you would keep it as you don't need to change program mode and etc. This is only if you're using shutter to take flags manually by
Okay.
pressing down the shutter button. Only then you want to change. No, sorry. AVS probably is required. Sorry, AVS also still required for APT because you want the camera to decide the flat durations. Yeah, exposure durations. Um, Drive to continuous is not required if you're using software to take it.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And do you take flats at different parts of the sky or only one part of
No,
the sky?
that's not really required if you're doing this contraption. That is
Okay.
required under two conditions. One, you're using a short focal length. You're using and you suspect the sky to have gradients. Okay.
Mhm.
So then you vary around, change and etc. The different stuff. That's what I used to do earlier. But if you ask me to do it now, I would do this. Actually, have always carry. I actually bought a white T-shirt, as white as it can be, a thin one, and that I don't wear. And the purpose of buying the T-shirt was to do this, and I carry it in my bag all the time, even though I don't shoot using DSLR, but it's there all the time, there in the bag.
Okay. But this contraption, at least with the 200 lens, I had some issues.
Why?
So one issue was that, okay, so the thickness of this material is not uniform. So it would actually cause some kind of gradient. If I stretch the image and see, I would see some kind of gradient.
I would say evaluate after you do post processing. Do you see the gradient after you have used the flat, or you're talking about the gradient in the flat itself? Gradient in the flat
Gradient in.
processing, that's kind of expected. So we can't say by looking at that, that's a wrong flat.
Mm-hmm.
We have to actually use the flat and then see. If you stretch it and then use it, see, the problem with the waste is if it had holes and etc. and that's showing up. So you need to use a correct kind of clothes as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you put this directly on the lens or on the hood?
On the
With
hood,
the,
of course.
even with the DSLR lenses.
Yes. Because even with the DSLR, because you're focused on at infinity, you're not focused at so close. So
Yeah.
it shouldn't matter. Uh, Doing it on the lens would be extremely dangerous because you're too close to the focus ring
Yeah. Yeah.
and you cannot stretch it. It
Correct.
has to be stretched and like this picture shows, and you put a rubber band around to hold it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? No. So I have this bunch of references on several topics that I have covered. You can go through. Also, this place. These are the places where I got the images that I've used throughout this presentation. So in a way, it is also acknowledgements um, to various talks and articles all around the stuff. There are few good ones, like for example, Astrophotography. Please go and check the light vortex astronomy article about it. Tells you what all things you have to install and everything that I've talked about. Okay, there's few good ones. I wanted to actually cover a topic on signal to noise ratio because capturing is all about how are you going to process. And instead of me doing it, there's a very good talk by Craig Sturck, and I put the YouTube link here. So for those of you who are interested, it's an absolutely beautiful talk. Really like it. And there is a beautiful article by John Rister on the same topic, for the PIX Insights. But at the time of writing this article, while he was writing this article, he also dealt with the things that we how many images is really required to flatten the for the maximum signal to noise. It's not 30, by the way. So 30 will give you significant reduction in or significant boost to your signal to noise ratio. But if you want to go really deep, you have to go. But of course, there is a point of diminishing returns and etc. you go through that article. It's nice to know. Yeah, that's about it. And thank you.
Hi everyone. We are a few more minutes left, and we are open to questions.
Yeah.
You can unmute yourself and do ask questions.
No questions. We're done. Oh.
Okay. Looks like there are no questions. Yeah, looks like there are no questions. I mean, this calls for closing statement. So basically, this was a very informative session. It was long, I agree, but it covered a lot of topics, and we went in depth. We covered almost every aspect of capturing deep sky objects, the equipments, what we are used, the procedures, the techniques, some hacks, you might say, to make life easier when we capture DSOs. It was a very informative session for me. The recording will be available on YouTube soon after the conclusion of the session.
Yeah, thank you, Vishwa, personally, and for organizing this and recording and uploading, and Kirti and the entire BAS for all the opportunities over the years, and this opportunity to present some of the learnings that I've had. Thank you.
Thank you, Subhankar. Kirti, you want to add anything?
Oh, no. Thanks a lot, Subhankar, for this very, very detailed session. And thanks for allowing us to upload these videos on YouTube as well. So I think in the years to come, it will be very helpful for many, many people.
Yep, I hope
Thanks
so.
for putting so much effort into this presentation.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Subhankar. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Bye.